Hello everyone, welcome to the live stream. We are live. My laptop tells me we're live anyway. Hope everything's working. The show where nothing goes wrong. Yeah, right. Let's see if we can get it seamless this time. Be an achievement if we do. Anyway, welcome to the live stream. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in, whatever climate you're in, you've got to annoy everybody by telling you it's a balmy 21 degrees centigrade here, blue skies, lovely morning. In Spain, and it will continue. I think the forecast is looking pretty good, but commiserations to all those, particularly in North America at the moment, terrible weather there in some parts of the States with snow and blizzards, and keep safe. So welcome, lots to talk about, I think, lots to look back upon the 2024 motor racing season, Formula One season particularly grinding to a halt because it's been such a long one. Now it's suddenly over. And then it will restart again in a burst. There won't be too much time. And yeah, lots to look forward to in 2025. Very, very unpredictable season, really, 24, wasn't it? We had Red Bull starting about where they ended up in 23 and then going into a slump. McLaren doing a very good job of bringing their car up to speed. They started really behind Ferrari and then quickly passed Ferrari, quickly took advantage to some extent of Red Bull's slump. Not as much as they should have, in my opinion, because there are only certain moments when a team like Red Bull is going to be down in a season, and McLaren didn't really maximise that period. And by the time Red Bull started to get their act together a little bit towards the end of the year, and obviously we had some wins for Max again, and that was always going to happen, it was a little bit too late, and McLaren will need to reflect on that, I think. So that's one thing. We can look at how the drivers stacked up in 2024. Of course, we know how they ended up in terms of the World Championship and the points, but there's another alternative top 10 or whatever we could perhaps have a look at as well. Maybe in this live stream, if somebody wants to have a go at that. So that's one thing. As you probably regular viewers would know, I was actually at Monza for Abu Dhabi, purely because I just need my regular fixes of seeing these unbelievable rocket ships they call World Rally Championship 1 cars, the four-wheel drive hybrid turbo mega monsters that guys like Kalle Rovanperä and Tanak and the new world champion Terry Novell drive with incredible skill through conditions of, well, the full extreme, the full gamut, from the snow of Sweden to the desert and the wildlife of Kenya. So yeah, that was just great to go to Monza. Also, any excuse to go to Monza, I will always go as well. And I always wanted to see Monza again post the Bernie era, when he basically destroyed the paddock and a lot of the shops and all the great things we used to love about Monza and laid it bare. But I still love to go there, and these days when you go to a Grand Prix, it's nothing but people and security guards, and I knew it would be a little bit lighter weight, and it was just lovely to go to Monza at a different time of year, fewer people, less officialdom everywhere, and my favourite shop run by Claudia still going strong. Incredible to see them going so well. Competition Market, which is just at the back of the Monza paddock, they've been in business for 50 years, would you believe? They've had to move a few times, but there they are, still doing very well. And they basically sell just racing kit, everything from Sparker to OMP to Alpine Stars. It's all helmets, an amazing autograph collection, as you might have seen from the videos I did from Monza. So that was a lot of fun, really enjoyed that. And now it's back into full-on, lots of stuff going on, lots of projects going on behind the scenes for me, Formula One wise, and they will hopefully become evident in the next couple of months or so. And I'll be still working on live streams and various other stuff before the season starts. So lots to talk about. I was thinking after Vegas about the proximity, obviously, of the next Grand Prix, Qatar and Abu Dhabi, and what life would have been like for Max Verstappen. Not that much time probably to enjoy the World Championship, having clinched it, because he just had to focus on the next race, and so that's fair enough. But it made me think of what it was like for Graham Hill in 1962 when he clinched or won the World Championship in the finale in South Africa, and then immediately was scheduled to race in the New Zealand Grand Prix at Pukekohe in Auckland a week later. That was just in the book, and he couldn't get out of that. Not that he would want to, because he was a racer, of course. So I thought, you know, wow, what a thing to have clinched the World Championship, and then your basic celebratory period is going to be in a 707, I guess it was then, flying to New Zealand. But much more than that, guess what happened on that flight from Durban, probably, to New Zealand? They went via Karachi, which was a pretty normal stop back then in terms of refueling, Karachi in Pakistan. And when they got there, they were due to connect with a flight out of the UK to take them on to Australia and then New Zealand, to Perth. And that flight was delayed. But in the meantime, because it was delayed, there was a check of all the visas and inoculations. And it turned out that Graham and a couple of others in the party didn't have an up-to-date yellow fever vaccination. And so in true New Year's, we're talking the New Year here, he was marched off to what Bruce McLaren, who was there as well, described as a shack on the runway for isolation. Can you believe that? And he just, and he and a couple of others, I think Bruce was in there as well. He didn't have this yellow fever thing either. And they were in this quarantine shack, and it was at the far end of the runway. So in other words, all the 707s and TriStars or whatever they were that would be taxing up would then do a U-turn right in front of this shack and then light up the engines full blast to do their takeoff. And they were in this quarantine shack for 7 hours. Graham Hill has just won the World Championship. Bruce McLaren's a leading Formula One driver, and they're locked in this quarantine shack. On January the 2nd, it probably would have been. 1 minute they were first class in the 707 out of Durban, champagne, whatever. The next minute they're in this quarantine shack. And then there were other dramas. They eventually got on the flight to Perth, but that was a problem because when they landed, there was a technical problem with the plane, which meant they had to stay in Perth for longer than they could. And meanwhile, the New Zealand Grand Prix is beckoning, and don't forget there's a big time change as well. And all of a sudden it's like Wednesday, with practice due to start on Thursday. And Qantas then basically diverted a 707 from Sydney to pick them up. Can you believe this happening today? And it was a commercial flight. It wasn't just a charter thing, but okay, yeah, we'll get them. And flew them from Perth to Sydney and then on to Auckland. And they missed Thursday practice for the New Zealand Grand Prix, got to the circuit Friday. Bruce was quick, didn't have any luck with reliability, and John Surtees won the race in the Lola. I think, he won the 2,000 guineas at Mallory Park in the Lola as well. Didn't have too many wins in that lovely Lola, Climax Bowmaker Lola, but beautiful car designed by Eric Broadley. And Surtees obviously destined to go to Ferrari at the end of that year, at the beginning of 63. He was joining Ferrari, actually. He just did a couple of races in the Lola and then went straight to Ferrari. Whereas Graham was scheduled to drive the front-engined Ferguson four-wheel drive that Jack Famine and Sterling Moss had driven in 61 British Grand Prix. And Sterling had won the Alton Park Gold Cup with it that year in the wet. It was a great car in the wet, but you weren't expecting a lot of rain at the New Zealand Grand Prix at Pukekohe in January. Anyway, Graham was slated to drive that, entered by Rob Walker. And this is the new world champion. So to bring it back into context with Max Verstappen, the new world champion arrives at the New Zealand Grand Prix absolutely shattered, not having slept probably for 72 hours. He gets into the Ferguson. It's massively overheating and there are no brakes, and it's a big front engine car anyway. But eventually he keeps working at it. And in the race, actually, things got a little bit better, and he was actually lying second when just before the finish, that's right, the clutch went on the line, and he'd had to drive the whole race without the clutch, and very, very hot as well, being the front engine. And then the clutch eventually packed up, and the gearbox packed up with like 2 laps to go. And then he flew back to England. He flew back to England as the new world champion. You'd imagine for some massive Buckingham Palace thing or something, but actually it was to do a film night with the BRM team to look back at, and employees and a few Formula One fans that had bought tickets to the cinema to look at a few home movies from Rivers Fletcher of BRM's season. And then he did a Scalextric demo race sort of 2 days later, and then he flew back to Australia again. So Max Verstappen, think yourself lucky that you just had 2 Grand Prix to do, and they were both pretty well organised, I imagine, from a Red Bull perspective. So here's actually a picture of Graham, just so you can get an idea of what it's like. Beautiful photograph, actually, on the Peter Nygaard Grand Prix photo archive. If you haven't seen it, go and have a look. Just a wonderful collection of photographs, modern and past, obviously. That's the 62 Italian Grand Prix on Monza, speaking of Monza, grid. Graham on the left, obviously, in the one-piece Dunlop overalls that he favoured at that time. 2 pairs of goggles in case a lens cracked in the race. This is before the race, they're on the grid. There's Bruce in the 2-piece Dunlops and helmet just, holding it between his legs. And Jim Clark on the right, 62, looking very young and fresh. I love the fact that Jimmy's got a paper armband on his arm just to tell the officials that he should be on the grid, even though he's a racing driver and he's already won Grand Prix by then, just in case they didn't know who he was. Classic Jimmy of just being very modest. Oh yeah, I should wear an armband. Yeah, I'll put the armband on. Imagine drivers today having to show their passes on the grid. And I don't laugh at it because, wow, weren't those ridiculous times. I laugh at it because they were charm. I don't laugh even at all, really. I mean, it's just charming times, and they were all racing drivers. They're all just as good then as they are now. It's just different names, different people, different times, different cars, different ways of going racing. And yeah, just amazing to think back at those times and how Max celebrated the World Championship and how Graham Hill welcomed his first World Championship. And of course he did win another one in 68. Sadly in the year that we lost Jimmy Clark in the other Lotus. So yeah, Max Verstappen, and there he is with Terry Newville. I think, talk about 2 well-deserving world champions in the same year. Couldn't have worked out better, really. I think in terms of Formula One, Max deserved that title for sure. And in terms of the World Rally Championship, no question, Terry Newville deserved that. For me, Newville, one of the fastest, most talented racing drivers on the planet, as I've said a few times. Very skillful. You can see there he's holding a trophy. He's holding a trophy there. That was at the Belgian Grand Prix this year. He actually won that radio-controlled race. He's in the Hyundai, Max obviously in the Red Bull at Spa. I think it's probably at Eau Rouge or somewhere like that. So that's the trophy he got. But yeah, 2 absolutely stunning racing drivers. And amazing, as I said before, they come basically from the same part of the world, don't they? We used to, I suppose it's a little bit like all the Kiwis at one time, and here we are in the sort of, is it the Benelux countries? Can we call them that? Max and Terry Newville. What is it about the roads, the water, the air there? Amazing. So, yeah, there's a preamble. And I'm going to have a go, I think, maybe at talking about a top 10 of this year, a sort of an unofficial top 10, not based on the World Championship. How would we rate them all? But let's get going with some questions. And the first is from Sarosh Soman. Thank you very much, Sarosh. Hi, Peter. How do you feel that Charles Leclerc... let me read it correctly. Do you feel that Charles Leclerc would benefit in having lessons with someone like Alain Prost, who's always calm and super quick, doesn't get emotional, which is Leclerc's only major weakness? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think you're right. Prost... I think Alain learned a lot from Nicky when he was at McLaren from 84 onwards. And what Prost learnt from Nicky was how not to let anybody else damage your car or get anywhere near you. Surround your car with cotton wool for 2 or 3 laps and then go motor racing. That sort of philosophy without going to extremes. And obviously there's a gap, you take it. And I think he also learnt from Nicky this whole Jackie Stewart thing, which Nicky kind of got from Jackie, which is make sure you've got no emotion in your system at the start of the race. You've got to be just completely calm and totally exposed, therefore, to everything that's going on around you and reacting in a very physical, reactive way, and not an emotional way, and not in a way that requires any thought. It's all got to be very instinctive, as it has to be at that speed going into the first corner after the start. And I think is that a failing of Charles Leclerc? I don't know. I don't know if it is. I think, as I've said before, for Charles to be judged against other drivers is a little bit unfair because of the environment in which he's spent most of his Formula One life, i.e. Ferrari. This is not a criticism of Ferrari, it's just a description of the way things are at Ferrari. It is very political. There's a massive spotlight on you, and it's a different sort of spotlight to the, the sleazy tabloid press of the UK, for example, or indeed the sort of the in-crowd, media crowd of Formula One. This is an Italian, very different thing. It's an Italian motor racing movement that actually understands the sport very well, but is still quite susceptible to influence from Ferrari, and that's quite a difficult thing to live with. And he's gone through a few team principals, or a few team principals have gone through Charles' career already, and adapting to all that, adapting to all the things that are required of a team that is building both an engine and a chassis in-house, unlike a lot of the teams against which they're competing. And also to carry on your shoulders the whole responsibility of Ferrari, Monaco, being a sort of cool elder statesman of Formula One almost, all of that is different from being a Max Verstappen, who can just basically turn up at Red Bull pretty low key, knows that everything functions like clockwork, generally speaking, and can just get on with it and probably doesn't have to say very much or do very much apart from just drive the race car. That's a very different life that Charles Leclerc's had to lead at Ferrari. And I think we should always bear that in mind when, glibly, a lot of people would like to criticize him for making a mistake here, a mistake there. I'm not saying that mistakes are forgivable, because at that level really they shouldn't be happening, although if you look at Max on any given Friday, he makes quite a lot of mistakes, and Charles used to confine them to Fridays, not completely, but he's certainly letting them overlap more now into the Grand Prix weekend proper. And so let's talk about the last race, and that's the thing that's going to be taken into the winter. And that was obviously Abu Dhabi and what happened for Charles there. Now, a lot of people will think, wow, what a racing driver. From the back of the grid to P3, unbelievable first lap. Of course, that's true. And that does give a great insight into Charles' aggression and his ability to look further than the car ahead of him. Obviously, the proviso is that he actually benefited in this case from being at the back of the grid, because he could see what was happening going into turn one, and he could position his car to get maximum momentum out of turn one and do his passing through 2, 3 and then into the hairpin when everybody was still a bit discombobulated and sorting out where they were. And he had a great view of all that. And it was a similar thing with the Bottas-Perez incident at the end of the straight. Again, he was in a perfect position just to take maximum advantage of that. So that was good, and that was classic Charles movement as a result of being able to position himself very, very well. And it's worth saying, of course, that had he not had that 10-place grid penalty, but only have exceeded the track limits, he would have been right in the middle of the accident probably. So it's a good thing that he had both and he was at the back. It's much better to be at the back if you're Charles Leclerc than to be in the middle, in my opinion, of a starting grid, for exactly the reasons I've just said. You're in a position to look and see what's going on in front of you, and inevitably there's going to be some sort of incident. But then again, on the other side, he made that unbelievable mistake in Q2 of track limits. Now, that is not what you would expect of Charles Leclerc, a driver at his level, with the responsibility that he has at Ferrari. And it's not the sort of thing you'd expect you see a Max Verstappen doing very much, for example, even though he's on the limit. We see an Oscar Piastri doing it quite regularly, but you could say, well, he's still a little bit raw, isn't he? And he's always pushing the limit. Charles has been around long enough not to make that sort of mistake. And it was probably a tyre warming thing. He just didn't know how much grip he had because he was trying to save the tyres for the end of the lap and they weren't at maximum temperature. There are probably lots of mitigating circumstances for what he did. But for me, that is what he should be taking into the winter, was that mistake and how he can ensure that that does not happen again. And going back to your question, Sarosh, it's a very long answer. Going back to your question, I'm not sure that sitting down with Alan Prost, having dinner with him, whatever, would solve the problem of exceeding track limits at Turn 1 and Abu Dhabi under pressure. I think, the other stuff he's pretty good at, actually. He's pretty good at it. The Prost, staying out of trouble and maximising your position in a crowded track, he's pretty good at that. The issue is this thing, these odd mistakes he makes, which do obviously cost the team a lot. And yeah, in the end he recovered from it, but it was not good at a time when Ferrari needed to be putting a lot of pressure on McLaren for the Constructors' Championship in qualifying, maybe pushing him into some sort of mistake. To have Charles do that in Q2 was just like, oh, we can relax now. If you're at McLaren, it was like, okay, all the pressure's off now. And that was not a good thing. That's not what they needed to be doing at that point. So, yeah, a good question, I think, but I'm not sure that is the answer. I don't think there is an answer, really. I think he just has to carry on doing what he's doing and just try to be better. Be more resilient. I think he will learn from Lewis as well now, in the same way that Prost learnt from Lauda. I think Charles will learn a little bit from Lewis. And maybe that sort of thing about how to contain your driving a little bit when there's a little bit of a question mark. Okay, next question. I'm going to go back here. It's completely different. It's from the same gentleman. Thank you very much, Josh. Did you have a chance to meet Walter Roll and any comments, insights on the way he drives? I did meet him a few times, only really to shake his hand, he and Christian Geisdorfer. And he, yeah, I mean, he's unbelievable. He's just like Terry Neville, to my eye. Everything is very, 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 very fast and very, very car control-y and incredible judgment, very, very precise. But there's a certain softness to the inputs that made Roll stand out amongst his peers, so the same way that they do with Neville, for me, to my eye. And he was unbeatable, I think, if things were going right, if he had more or less a decent car, let's put it that way. And I still look back at Argonal 81 Rally of Portugal in the fog, the thick fog, and the way he won that stage and the margin of victory as one of the greatest pieces of driving, including Formula One, that we're ever going to see. And that should always be remembered, I think, as an incredible feat of skill, anticipation, feel, and making good under the conditions of how to do it. And obviously there's a lot of looking out the side of the car. And don't forget, the lighting systems weren't as good on the cars as they are today. So yeah, Roll to me was outstanding. Like Terry Neville, I think had his career gone a different way and had he got into single seaters, I think both of them could have been very successful in Formula One. Very successful indeed. And I don't say that lightly. Sam Van Haren. Hi there, Sam. Hi, Peter. What are your thoughts on bike racing, MotoGP? Is there anything you like or dislike about it in particular, and would you ever consider creating content about it? Having a lovely day. To be honest with you, I'm not massively into MotoGP. I know it sounds odd. A lot of Formula One people are. I remember reading once a column by LJK Setright, the great British engineer stroke journalist who wrote for Car Magazine for many years, who basically said a very simple thing. He said, if you consider that about the best angle you can corner a MotoGP bike at is about 45 degrees, maybe a bit more these days, but not a lot more. That's 1G. It's only 1G, I think, is what he said. And therefore, therein lies the difference between Formula One and MotoGP. I thought, well, that's quite an interesting point, isn't it? Because, what we love about Grand Prix racing is the sort of 4.5G on the left, 4.5G on the right, all within 1 second of one another. And I noticed that the new regs in Formula One for 26 involve a more mandatory cooling system for the drivers, which is a good thing. And that just gives you an insight as to how high the physical loads are. And I'm not saying just because MotoGP has lower physical loads than Grand Prix racing, therefore it's inferior. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's an interesting point, isn't it? That, G-load is not a thing on a bike, obviously. But a lot of other things are. Balance and judgment and well, from my point of view, sheer bravery for sure. More bravery, I think, than required in a Grand Prix car. And under the heading of bravery, I've always, adhered to the principle that Sir Stirling Moss gave us, which was that if you are brave, you shouldn't be driving a racing car. If you rely on bravery, I think is what he said, because everything should be anticipation and feel and not bravery, not plunging into the unknown and taking a risk. But I think on MotoGP, it looks like it's a little bit tending to more bravery. I don't know. I find it all happens in a blur. There are so many bikes, so much going on. I find it quite difficult to really get into it and watch it in the way I can a Grand Prix or indeed a rally. Maybe it's just the way my brain works. And I've always said that if you want nothing but constant overtaking, very close racing, unpredictable results, MotoGP, possibly BTCC, something like that is your British Touring Car Championship, is your thing. And don't expect Formula One ever to be able to match that. And I think one of the problems Formula One has had over the years is that there have been these outside pressures from people who don't really understand it to say, we've got to have as many overtakes in Formula One as MotoGP, whereas they're completely different animals altogether. And so for me, overtaking is not the be-all and end-all. So if you take that out of MotoGP, then it comes down to the skill of the rider, the knee on the road, the balance. And then I think about my mates who were very good motorcyclists, John Surtees, Mike Hailwood, Johnny Giacotto, Damon Hill, to name but four. And I think all four of those actually achieved their fulfillment on four wheels in a Grand Prix car. And I spoke to them many times about bikes. And if I talked to Mike Hailwood about bikes, it would always be, but the Surtees is so good through Leocop or whatever we were talking about at Kyalami at any given moment. And it was just like, this is the real world. And I suppose because I've spent so much time in Formula One and I've got to know some of those great motorcycle world champions and I've got to sort of understand their philosophy, that I do tend to be much more of a Formula One guy than a MotoGP guy, I guess. I'd love to see some of the current guys in Formula One. But I mean, when Rossi drove I think he drove a Ferrari, didn't he, quite early on in his career? And he was very, very disparaging about it, saying, this was not very good. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't load it up rubbish or whatever he said. Something weird. He did a test at Barcelona. I thought, he was nowhere near as quick as Michael Schumacher. But he was quite negative about it all. And I thought, no thanks. And then, of course, you got Michael wanting to do bikes, didn't he? Which I think was a mistake. All I can say. Anyway, interesting to ramble on about that, isn't it? Thank you very much for that. Right, let's have a look at some others. Thanks very much, everybody, for your questions coming in. I know it's a bit of a funny time, but this time, speaking purely selfishly, actually works for me. So what can I say? It works for me because I like to do it during the day when I've got things going on. And I'm talking this because I'm just trying to get my question panel thing sorted so I can see what I'm doing here. So, Sam Van Haren again. Is there a particular rally in Europe you recommend visiting? After hearing your positive feedback, my interest has really peaked recently. I'd love to attend one someday. Thanks again. Well, I'm not really the right person to ask because I haven't done that many rallies, but we really enjoyed the Rally of Finland this year. It was incredibly easy to do, actually. We just flew into Helsinki. It was very easy to get a rental car, drive up, found a nice hotel in Jyväskylä, which I think is Kalle Rovanpera's hometown, if I think about it. And don't forget, Toyota and Hyundai have mega testing facilities in that area as well, which they're using in the winter, and I'm sure that's where most of them are already. And then the stages are really well organized. You can get out there, and even the one in Jyväskylä on the Friday night was very organized. It was easy to get in and watch, and it was just great. Great atmosphere out on the stages. You sort of wait there, and you can have lunch and barbecue with all the lads and the girls, and then you're looking up this wooded trail where there's 4 or 5 jumps, and you just hear this sound of this engine note getting louder and louder, and all of a sudden it bursts into view, and it's sort of, I don't know, 10 meters in the air, then lands a bit sideways, stays on the throttle, then the next one. Just unbelievable. So yeah, I would love to go back to Finland, and that's certainly on my shopping list for next year. I'm going to try and do the Monte Carlo Rally in 25. It's a bit logistically more challenging, definitely. We're looking at doing the Canaries Rally, actually. It'd be fun, from Spain, I think. Portugal we did. Again, very easy to do Portugal. Get out there in the stages, lovely. But I haven't got much experience of anywhere else, apart from the RAC Rally in the UK, which I did many times, and of course that doesn't exist anymore. So I would recommend the Rally of Finland, is in answer to the question. So there you go. GGY85. Hello from Ukraine. Hi there. A lot of time obviously for the Ukrainians, as you can see from my description. I always say stand with Ukraine, and my son has lots of Ukrainian friends at school. So Glenroy Heath, if Lewis gets his old motivation back, do you think Charles can beat him over the whole season? I thought you were going to say, if Lewis gets his old motivation back, do you think he can beat Charles in qualifying more than 50% of the time? I think that's more of an achievable, realistic goal for Lewis, and he'll be thinking, yeah, let the cards fall where they may in terms of race results, because I may get the rub of the draw, I may not. But if I'm there or thereabouts in qualifying, I'm always going to be in quite good shape in the race, because I'm Lewis Hamilton and I know how to race. And I think that will be his philosophy. And I think he is entirely motivated. And I think he's so motivated by the Ferrari thing that he was not very motivated by the Mercedes thing. I think that's why you saw his performances dropping off a bit, because his mind is already on Ferrari for sure. And as I said before, it can be any number of things. It can be his road cars. Hello, Dexter. What are you doing? Hello. Here's Dexter. We haven't seen him for a while. Let's just see if we can get Dexter on camera. There he is. What are you doing there, Dex? He's just come in. Just have a look, see what's going on, really. He likes to be here for most of the questions and offer his opinion. Yeah, anyway, getting back to Lewis. Yeah, his dogs too, of course, will be going over there, I guess, won't they? Is it they? I think it is. So the cars, the pasta, the coolness of Italy in general, fashion, any country that's shaped like a boot, to quote Sting, has got to be cool. The fashion, the houses, the whole thing, he'll just love it all. And so that's the motivation. And obviously wanting to win again, that goes without saying. The question is, if it's a good Ferrari, and chances are it will be, because they've had a pretty good car this year, all not as good as a McLaren, not as good as a Red Bull over a year, but not bad. And don't forget, I think there was 68 points ahead of McLaren after Monaco this year. It's amazing, isn't it, when you think about how McLaren then caught and passed them, and Ferrari basically stagnated for a while. That was the problem. They just stagnated mid-season. Anyway, getting back to it, the car should be half reasonable. If it's half reasonable, and Lewis is qualifying, I mean, his motivation and his dignity and his feeling and his adrenaline will all be related to how quick he is in qualifying. And if he's within, half a second of Charles, maybe ahead, maybe just behind, he'll be great in the races for sure. Then if he's got a good car, he's got to beat Charles over a season, and I think that'll be difficult. If it's a race-winning, championship-winning car, I think Charles will do it over a season. But for sure, Lewis can win races at Ferrari in that situation, for sure. If it's a bad car, he's more used to driving a bad car than Charles, so he'll probably do quite a good job, won't he, on the bad car? Hope it's not. Okay. Raul, how did Norbert Haug run Mercedes as in management style alongside Ron Dennis and the board? Shame he left before the dominant period. You know what? I was thinking about this only 2 days ago. I was looking at a picture of a smiling, laughing Toto Wolff, and I thought, I wonder how Norbert feels about all that. Because I was a bit of a Norbert Haug fan. I'm still a bit disconcerted by his relationship by marriage, distant relationship with Dan Gurney, and how he didn't really embrace the Dan Gurney relationship to the point of Dan being a welcome celebrity guest at Grand Prix whenever he wanted to turn up. I think it was always a bit of an uphill battle for Dan to get a pass or something, which is completely and utterly ludicrous when you think about it. But putting that to one side, Norbert was definitely instrumental in setting up Mercedes powertrains based on what Ilmor had been doing with Mercedes, which was a huge, huge thing. And he was also very good in terms of keeping Ron Dennis when McLaren were winning with Mercedes, keeping Ron very focused on what he could do very well, and Norbert doing what he does very well at Mercedes. And it was very well delineated, I always felt. And Norbert has a very good brain. I was talking to him relatively recently, and he was just very knowledgeable about everything that was going on, very broad-minded. And I think, I can only imagine that nobody really knew what happened, but I can only imagine that basically he got sacked because of the whole new regime at Mercedes. And he did, and he walked away with a lot of dignity, actually, I thought. But it wasn't a great thing to have that. I mean, because he was a good guy, and I say good guy, he's an effective operator, a very effective operator. And he definitely, if Michael embraced him and his brain the way he did, then, for sure there isn't much wrong with Norbert Haug in terms of his racing brain and his nous and his ability to put things together. He did a lot for Hockenheim as well, didn't he? And did his best to keep that race on the championship, the German Grand Prix, and revamped it. Did a lot for the Nürburgring too. I mean, he was very good in all the things that mattered, in my view, and didn't waste time on a lot of the stuff that doesn't matter, which we get a lot of in Formula One these days. So, thanks for asking that question. I am a Norbert Haug fan, and I'd love to see. I'd love to have seen him stay in Formula One. I'd love to see him in Formula One still. Actually, I think he should be. He'd probably be a very good FIA president if I think about it. And there we go, on that bombshell. Pogby, that's a good name for you. Hi Peter, curious about your opinion on this hypothetical. If all teams had a car capable of challenging for the World Drivers' Championship, which driver on the 25 grid would have the best chance to take it to Max? If all teams had a car capable of challenging. In other words, if it was Formula 2, where even though they're identical cars, Prema managed to get it completely wrong all year and never managed to get the best from the car at all. It doesn't seem to matter anymore whether they're the same cars or not. In fact, it's even more difficult when it is the same car for everybody to get them to operate. I don't know why it is. How could Prema have such a bad Formula 2 season? It's unbelievable, isn't it, with those two drivers? Anyway, well, this is a hypothetical, and they're all in... I forgot to tell you, 62 New Zealand Grand Prix, 63 New Zealand Grand Prix it was, which that race John Surtees won where Bruce was quick, but then he retired. Bruce actually then did the touring car race after the Grand Prix in a Morris 1100. Bruce McLaren, Morris 1100. I wonder if we'll see Max Verstappen in a, Fiat 500 at some point. No, I doubt it very much. And don't forget, in the days of the Bahamas Speed Week, in the 60s, drivers like Rindt and Amon and McLaren did the Formula V race and loved it. I think Rindt got disqualified for taking out half the field at the first corner or something like that, as he would. I don't know. Which driver on the 25 grid? In other words, you're saying who's right up there? Oh, it's got to be... if you look at the top 10 this year, I'd make Max still my number one driver of top 10. But number two, quite difficult, and I would give equal billing. I would say equal to, just to sort of cop out, to Lando and George. But very different drivers in different ways, in style and approach and personality. But I think in terms of overall package, not much between those two. And they're both extremely good, and they've both been able to exhibit those talents very well in 2024. Which is why I would have them probably equal to. I'm probably missing somebody, but I'd have them ahead of Charles, I think. And so I would say it would be George or Lando, wouldn't it? I'd love to see Lando in something other than a Grand Prix car. Well, we've seen him in Formula 3 and Formula 2, and he was good, very good. I suspect he'd probably be very good in something like a touring car or a rally car, for sure. I know he loves it. So I would say, yeah, George... It's interesting. I'd love to throw in a name like Liam Lawson, but then I was a bit disappointed when I watched the Red Bull thing a couple of weeks ago, before Vegas actually, when they had Yuki and Liam out in massive NASCAR dirt oval stock car things. I guess 600 horsepower, something like that. And they actually did a pole, a lap time thing. And Yuki was quicker than Liam, which I thought was kind of interesting, given that neither driver had much experience with either car or the track or the surface. It was interesting that Yuki was that good, really, wasn't it? So there we go. Sam Van Haren, another question from Sam. One final question. Will you ever consider joining Eddie and David on their FFS podcast as a guest appearance? I think it'd be a good addition. Well, I've never listened to it or watched to it, not because I don't want to. I just, too many other things to do when I'm not talking to you guys. But if they asked, I guess I would. I suppose one of the things I really enjoy about doing what I'm doing now with you on YouTube is being able to go into subjects with great depth. In great depth. I'm not saying that my knowledge is necessarily deep, but I can go into it pretty deeply, like the story of Graham Hill and the 62, 63 New Year that he had or didn't have. But normally when you're sharing the mic with others or you're on a TV show, there's always a time limitation and somebody else wants to say something. And I'm not saying this from a point of view of hopefully being arrogant or in any way egocentric. But one thing that always used to annoy me when I was doing a lot of TV and or still does today when you're doing TV is that when for example, they used to throw to me down in the pit lane and speed, and I'd say something and I'd say, looks like Michael's got a problem with the engine. There seem to be a lot of mechanics around the front of the car at the moment. Maybe they're doing a ride height adjustment. Maybe it's something more. Okay, back to you. And it was quite clear that nobody had been listening to me. And then they would carry on about something else completely different. Whereas logically, you would say, I wonder what that is, Steve. Yeah. And you'd bring it, you'd continue the theme. And the same goes for interviewing people. It's just like, you see a lot of these interviews and you say, so how was that stage for you? It was very difficult. There was a lot of fog and a car. I didn't feel very good. The front end of the car wasn't very good. I was locking up the brakes quite a lot. The handbrake didn't seem to be working. Next question, was there a lot of fog? It happens all the time. And so I quite like doing my own thing is what I'm getting around to saying. I'm not saying it would be like that with EJ and DC. What do they talk about, I wonder? I'm trying to think about the relationship between those two. They never actually... did they race together? I don't think they did they? No. I'd love to. I'd talk to EJ about his Formula 3 racing, obviously, and how Nigel blew him away in Formula 3, and he had all that Marlboro money to no effect. And, and I'd give EJ a hard time, obviously, as you do, have a laugh with EJ. So, I'd definitely have a laugh. I'm not sure we'd achieve much, apart from anything else. Shaq Marriott. Hi, Peter. I honestly think Charles will win next year as long as he has a good front end, which he hasn't had since the beginning of 2002. Lewis won't beat him. Also, how close will Kimi be to George Russell? I'm just thinking about that. Charles in the front end. I wouldn't have said that he's one of these guys that can't live with flick oversteer or, doing what he needs to get around understeer. And because obviously every driver needs a good front end, likes a good front end, but I think Charles can put up with a mediocre front end better than Carlos Sainz could or can, and better than, say, George Russell can. So I think Charles pretty good in that area, and he will always be brilliant if he does have a great front end, but he's pretty good if it's not there for him. So I'm not sure I agree with that first point, but I think he will win. Definitely he'll win races again, and we should say probably the most climactic event of 2024 in terms of its stature on the world, the shoulders of the world, was Charles winning the Monaco Grand Prix. I think it was a big thing, wasn't it? Massive thing for him, for the Principality, for the history of that race, for Ferrari in that part of the world. It was just a huge thing. So that was, and Charles can obviously win Grand Prix again, and he could win a championship if the car's half reasonable. And I think over a season, I think he would beat Lewis for the championship if Lewis also has a championship winning car. It's not to say Lewis wouldn't win a lot of Grand Prix in that situation. And how close will Kimi be to George Russell? Well, he is, he's starting off a little bit on the back foot. I know had a couple of outings since Monza, but, going off the way he did was not great. And then Formula 2's been not brilliant. I mean, certainly Oliver Behrman, second half of the year, has been as quick, if not quicker. And then he was ill, which was a bit odd as well. I'm not saying that I'm not sympathetic. Obviously I am. But, you only got to do one thing if you're a racing driver before you get to the garage. That's stay as fit as you possibly can. So it's weird that he got so ill. But anyway, putting that to one side, I think George will do him, to be honest, in year one. I think he will. But Kimi does seem to be able to get into corners quite early and to do, he's quite neat and tidy the way he drives, and he seems pretty good in traffic in general. I wouldn't have said that he's any quicker or better than Frederick Vesti in that area, but he's obviously got all the momentum and he's got all the support and the people that believe in him, which is a great thing. But I don't think he'll be as quick as George, certainly in year one. And he may have a few more issues, in terms of staying on the road because of that. And I suspect that because he has got this natural sort of slightly earlier turn in than George, but George will be quicker. I suspect there'll be a lot of, this is where George is braking, this is where George is putting on the power, this is where George's steering input begins, blah, blah, blah. And it'll probably get quite confusing for him, because I can't imagine anybody at Mercedes is saying we've got this jewel of a driver who is an early turn-in, shorter corner driver than George. Isn't that brilliant? We've got to bring the best out in him. I don't imagine they'll be doing that at all. They'll be saying, he's 0.3 slower here, 0.1 slower there, 0.1 quicker here. And they'll be doing all this cross-reference between the two. And that'll be okay for George, because he won't really care. But I suspect it'll be a confusing time for Kimi. Unless I've got I'm sure that'll be the case, actually. I can't imagine there'll be... And I think that's why Oscar's probably lost his way a little bit in terms of pace in the last third of the year, because Lando's been doing such a good job. Inevitably, they've been looking at what Lando's doing, and it's taken away some of Oscar's... he was starting to do a really nice job with shorter corners, and it's taken a little bit away from that, I think, as engineers tend to. Minimum speed, so important. Get on the power as soon as possible. Got to be the answer. Brake as late as possible. None of which I agree with, of course, as regular viewers would probably know. Zishan Afsar. Hi, Peter. Do you think Norris has enough of the winning mentality to stay in a title challenge across a season? Feel he's too nice compared to the likes of Max Lewis, etc. You've summed it up quite well, I think, Zishan. And I think that's a fair comment to make about Lando. I would say in mitigation of Lando that he's only going to be as good as his team allows him to be. Now, you could respond to me and say, Max doesn't worry about the team. He just does his own thing, and he's got his own personality, and he doesn't let anybody tell him what to do. He takes control. But Lando's a different driver, and he came into Formula One a different way. He came in under the arm of Zach Brown, with obviously well financed by his family, but Zach spending the money well, looking after Lando very well, putting his arm around him, and so therefore that side of Lando's brain, this side of I'm going to do things my way. These guys don't know what they're talking about. I'm going to just do what I know is correct as a racing driver. That has not been developed at all in his personality. And he's very, very much a team player at McLaren. And what McLaren want is what Lando wants, basically. As far as I can see, that's what the evidence would suggest. And so it's very difficult even for Lando now, because he won't be taking a 30, 40, 50,000 foot view of the 2024 season. He'll basically be drinking and swallowing the McLaren line, which is that we had a brilliant year, we all worked together, we won the Constructors' Championship, we took the Drivers' Championship almost to the wire, what a fabulous thing. And nobody at McLaren, I'm sure, will be saying, we really messed up here, because when Red Bull were down, we didn't do anything like enough to take advantage of it. In fact, when Red Bull were down, we were actually playing around with the two drivers as to who was going to score points after you, Claude. What a ridiculous thing. And I don't think anybody at McLaren's thinking that way, certainly not Zach. And I don't therefore think Lando's thinking that way. Now, whether that translates into, is Lando strong enough? If he wins the first 3 races of 25 and Piastri has retirements in the first 3 races, and all of a sudden, even for people like McLaren, it's pretty clear that their best championship chance is going to be Lando Norris, and they decide finally that they should actually, understand that. I think Lando definitely does have the ability to take the championship and every race to Max, to George, to Charles. And he's just as strong as they are. I really believe that. A lot of people, I think, have confused Lando's situation this year with the McLaren management of 1 minute winning a race with ease, the next minute having to give the win to Oscar Piastri, or coming into Q1 and Baku when he shouldn't be. All these things have added up to what sometimes looks like Lando's very weak or lost and doesn't really know how to race. And none of that's true. And what a start he made in Abu Dhabi. There's a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon saying he couldn't start races. And look what he did in Abu Dhabi. Brilliant start. So I think he's very tough and very strong. As I said all along, his biggest problem for sure is Oscar Piastri in the other car. It's not Max, it's not Charles, it's not George, it's Oscar Piastri. It's how to beat this very, very fast young Australian in an identical car who's got at least 50% of the McLaren garage rooting for him. And that's a big, big, big ask for Lando Norris. I think if he's on a circuit where he can do what he can do very well, and he has that wonderful ability on very fast corners, medium speed corners, to let the car float in a way that Oscar doesn't, and Oscar's just looking for the moment of putting on the power, then I think Lando's fine. But if he's at a circuit where if Oscar's back to where he should be, which is shortening the corners and being really precise in terms of how he uses the front end of the car, it's going to be quite difficult for Lando to beat him. And that's a problem. If he qualifies behind Oscar anywhere, it's always going to be a problem for him. And, as I say, if it was anybody in the other car, really, I mean, I wouldn't, not Pierre Gasly probably, but Esteban Ocon, or possibly even Carlos Sainz, certainly Daniel Ricciardo, Lando Norris would be a different racing driver even today. But because they put Oscar there, a lot of things have, as I said, he hasn't been able to focus 100% on driving out of his garage into the pit lane. He's always had to be slightly aware of what's going on one side of the garage next to him, because this is the guy he's got to beat. And there'll be engineers putting in overlays all the time with Oscar, and that's very annoying for him. As much as he has to say, isn't this brilliant, we're working as a team, and wow, isn't it wonderful, Oscar gave me that win or whatever in the sprint race. I mean, give me a break. Yeah, it's a complicated one, but don't underestimate Lando. He's very, very good. I've always said that. And I became a massive fan after that Pau Formula 3 race he had when he didn't win. He hit a curb, I think, and the suspension broke, but he was unbelievably quick. Wonderful to watch. Wilf's Wanderings. Hi, Peter. How would the great Jim Clark fit on today's grid? Well, just as a reminder, let's have a look at the great Jim Clark on the grid in 62, the Italian Grand Prix with his armband. There he is. Actually, you see the top half of those overalls tucked into the bottom half, as distinct from Graham's, which are one piece. I've actually got those overalls, that exact top half I have right here. Amazing, isn't it? I'll show them to you one day. I might even show you them today if we have a lull. Anyway, back to it. How would he fit in? Well, he'd be worrying about, does he have the right pass? For sure. To get into the paddock, he'd be completely bemused by the bing bong, the picture coming up, and then a message saying, you are not allowed in the paddock, go away. Any Jimmy would. I'm glad you say fit in, as distinct of how quick would he be, because of course he'd be mega quick. How would he fit in? I think he'd be very uncomfortable, wouldn't he? All the bodyguards everywhere, and the mirrored glass, and the do not come in unless you're invited signs. I mean, bearing in mind, he wouldn't go into the Duckham's tent in the rain at Snetterton in 66 because he hadn't been formally invited, even though he was standing out in the rain without an umbrella. I can't imagine he'd feel very comfortable in a Formula One paddock area at all. I think if he bumped into Max would say, wow, Jim Clark. come and look at the car. It's the first thing he'd say. And Jimmy would go and have a look at the car, and he would love the car. He would love everything about it, I think. Obviously, you'd need to explain things to him, like, you know, what a digital display is and how what an active differential is and how you can adjust the brake balance without just pressing a button and brake by wire, all that stuff. But he would love all that. I mean, Jimmy was very into technology in his time. No question about that. I mean, he was the guy that pushed Colin Chapman into building a car with 2 brake pedals, the Lotus 58 Formula 2 car, so that he could brake with the left foot. He never got to race it, sadly. But that was all Jim Clark. And Jimmy was putting aero deflectors on the Lotus 49 before Colin Chapman was, as he did in the beginning of the 68 Tasman series with Alan McCall. And, you know, he was totally into technology and advancing the thing, and totally into spraying the car red, white and gold instead of green and yellow. He liked that as well. So, you know, Jimmy wasn't this sort of, you know, cloth cap wearing Scots farmer who resisted all change. He was very much at the cutting edge of everything. So he would love it. And he would love a guy like Max, I think, who's just a racing driver and doesn't get too involved with all the hoopla, the ballyhoo, as Jimmy probably would have called it. He didn't like Indy, the ballyhoo of Indy in the mid-60s. So what would you think of Formula One today? All too much ballyhoo, he would say. I think that's what he would say. Good question. It's lovely to think of those things. What do you think? It'd be interesting to think of many drivers from the past, actually, wouldn't it? And to see what they. I mean, if you think about Georges Boillot, the French driver, I'm probably mispronouncing it, Boillot, Boillot probably, who was a phenomenal racing driver and for Peugeot and nearly won the French Grand Prix against the might of Mercedes at Lyon in what was it, 1914. But the story doesn't end there, because he then enlisted into the French Air Force and became a crack fighter pilot, obviously biplanes, and had a lot of, you know, success is the wrong word, but a lot of victims, and eventually died over the Somme, shot down. I mean, he was an absolute hero. So what somebody like that would think of Formula One paddock today, in which he would be entitled to stand proud because he was so quick and so good as a racing driver, but what he would think about the squealing over money and politics and petty egos when he had this enormous personality and character that took him well beyond Formula One into being a crack fighter pilot. And he was not the only racing driver. Of course, we lost several drivers in the war. Williams, very good example for the French resistance, winner of the first Monaco Grand Prix. Anyway, I digress completely, but it'd just be interesting if you could just sort of drop all these figures from the past into a Formula One paddock today. I think hopefully a lot of the people in the Formula One paddock would think, yeah, we are over the top here. We need to get a life, and we need to listen to what these great people are saying about us, because it's embarrassing how focused we are on money and greed and materialistic beauty and all that rubbish. Yeah. What a live stream this is turning out to be. Zishan Afsa, again, hi there. Do you think Red Bull will consider Yuki being in the second car for the 25 season? Surely he's good enough and has the experience now. You know what? I was talking to Cameron about this, and to me, he is the logical driver. I mean, the logical driver is Carlos Sainz. For me, absolutely no-brainer. Carlos Sainz should be in that other car. But if for whatever reason that's not going to happen, and it doesn't look as if it is, then Yuki is the next logical guy, because his ability to score points this year after terrible qualifying sessions has been outstanding. Consistency in the race and his ability to manage tyres, extremely good. So he deserves the drive. However, I think almost certainly they're going to give it to Liam Lawson, are they not? Because they see him as having even more of a future. He's a bit of a cool dude. But beyond that, he's very calm, very, very controlled, has a very good racing brain, great car control. Max obviously likes him. They get on well. And I'm sure it'll be Liam Lawson. I can't imagine it'll be Yuki. If it is, I'll be pleasantly surprised. I'm sure it'll be Liam Lawson. And Let's not say that's not deserved by Liam. It is. I think he's a very, very good racing driver. I wonder what Marcus Armstrong will think about that, because they've kind of been together all this time, haven't they? These two New Zealand stars, and Marcus over in IndyCar now. And there's Liam getting this big opportunity. But I think, you know, as I said to Cameron, I think one of the things that's worked against Yuki is all these outbursts on the radio and this sort of over-emotional swearing hype that he's got. Is quite fun in a way, I suppose, for a TV viewer. But I think if you're making a long-term decision about a driver, it does add up after a while. And then you've got the Liam Lawson on the other side of the coin being very calm, very Jack Brabham-like, if you like, almost Denny Hulme-like in his approach. Then, you know, that's why you go there. As I say, it was interesting in that Red Bull runoff thing they did on the dirt, on an oval, quarter-mile oval, I think it was. I think it was about 500-600 horsepower thing. You had all sliding, big oversteer. Yuki beat Liam. Couple of tenths, agreed, but no, he still beat him. And you know, and if that's the Yuki people would say, well, if Liam is the next, whatever, let's not say the next Max Verstappen, let's say the next Charles Leclerc, then why didn't he beat Yuki over, you know, in that car? In the same way that Ayrton Senna, for example, got the pole for that Mercedes touring car race when they were in 2-litre Cosworth Mercs 190Es at the Nürburgring in '84. And he got the pole against a lot of very good Grand Prix drivers. Although the outstanding result that day, of course, was Carlos Reutemann, who qualified second, having never seen the circuit before and having been in retirement for 2 years. And he still beat all the other Grand Prix drivers apart from Ayrton. That was impressive. We got a super chat here from Kevin Pryor. Hi, Kevin. Hello, Peter. Thank you very much for the super chat. Why are Red Bull taking so long to decide who's driving alongside Max? Is it too long? Well, I suspect they're just trying to finish off the negotiations with Perez, are they not? I would think Perez wants a lot more money to go away than Red Bull want to pay him. And then there's the further discussion of all the sponsorship that he's effectively brought to the team, which will continue, I guess. They're trying to ensure that it continues. So that's taking time. And is any commission going to be therefore paid to Perez in lieu of retainer, maybe, or prize money or whatever? So it's quite a complicated deal to put together, I think. If you've got a driver under contract who's also brought with him a lot of money to the team, which are separate contracts with the team, but nonetheless wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the driver being in the car, and all of a sudden now you put enough pressure on the driver and the driver's kind of reluctantly agreeing that it's time to end it all. How do you do that? Of course, if Perez said, I've had enough, I don't want to be a Grand Prix driver anymore, I'm out of here, I don't want anything, it would be easy. But he's not going to be saying that, is he? He's going to be saying, I did this, I did that, you didn't have this, you wouldn't have this if it wasn't for me. And that's why it's all taking so long. It's not a question of selecting the driver. It's a question of how they finish off with Perez. That's why there's a delay, I would imagine. And the lawyers will be having a field day as well, I think. So will, because the other balancing act will be the Carlos Slim thing, because you'd imagine that Slim will be very much behind Perez in this thing. He's going to get behind Colapinto as well, I think, or hopefully. But you'd also imagine that Christian Horner and Red Bull are trying to keep in nicely with Carlos Slim as well. So how do they do that? You know, that's quite difficult. Shaq Marriott. I had a debate with someone, and I think Dan Gurney is better than Sterling Moss. I'm not sure Dan would have agreed with that. But then Dan was always that sort of guy, wasn't he? He's a lovely guy. I wouldn't have said he was better than Sterling. I would have said that he was certainly as good as Sterling in a number of areas. And certainly in terms of engineering and building cars and doing a great job as a team owner, yeah, way. I mean, Sterling never did that. And he had Sterling Moss Automobile Race Team, smart. It was a great team. John Whitmore wouldn't necessarily agree with that. He had that funny fastback Lotus Elan that Sterling had paid for, I think, to be developed, and it kept losing rear wheels and breaking rear axles and stuff. But Sterling as a racing driver, Birdcage Mazda, DBR S1, Aston Martin, Maserati 250F, Mercedes, Lotus 2018, 21, Cooper, Climax, rear engine. I mean, he was as good as it gets as a racing driver, I think. And he was, I mean, whereas Dan had that life as an engineer driver and won with the Eagle in 67 Belgian Grand Prix, Sterling on the other side of the coin didn't do that. But what he did, he was the first ever really true professional Grand Prix driver in the term, in the sense that we know them today, being very aware of sponsorship, very aware of public image, very aware of the importance of media and PR, and just living the life that nobody had ever lived before as a Grand Prix driver, and taking Formula One to a different level of public perception. And he was articulate, he was fun, he was brilliant in so many ways. And his first Grand Prix win happened to be the British Grand Prix at Aintree in a factory Mercedes. I mean, what a thing. And then Van Wall won the 57 British Grand Prix with Sterling and Tony Brooks. And so it was all, it's very British, but equally he was very cosmopolitan. He'd have his suits made in Hong Kong and Singapore, and he would love going to the Bahamas, and he loved going to South Africa and Australia, and he was all over the world, but he was a great ambassador for the sport wherever he went. That was Sterling, and he was a great speech maker, funny guy. Whereas Dan was a bit more reserved, but totally lovable and kind and wonderful man, and a great racing brain, great engineering brain. Did so much for the sport. I'd hate ever to get into any sort of discussion about who was better, because they were both absolute icons for me. And luckily, I was very fortunate to know them both very well. Aaron Lee, thanks again, Aaron. Hi, Peter. In Abu Dhabi, when Max started spinning, he floored the throttle to do a 360 and therefore was able to rejoin the middle of the pack. Oscar didn't, only spun 180. And as a result, yeah, well, there you go. Thank you very much. I think for that, we go back to the picture of Max Verstappen and Terry Neuville, do we not? I've been saying it recently, very Terry, when Max does something. And I say that not lightly, because Terry Neuville his car control is exactly that. And Max knows that, and Terry knows how good Max is as well. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I was thinking that at that moment. Whereas at Baku, we often see it's quite tight runoff areas, and it's always interesting there to see the guys that just have the confidence just to go wow like that, and other ones that sort of a bit more gingerly and have to get it right, and Lance Stroll, whatever. But when it's Max, it's bang, yeah. And it was very, very clear there how good Max was. I mean, total confidence, just 360 and off, wonderful. And it was similar when he had that moment. It was Q3, wasn't it, when he came out of the last corner and had the rear tyres had gone completely, and had one of these. He stayed on the throttle, came back. It was obvious, when the grip's so low off on the runoff area with the curbs, that when you hit the tarmac again, it's always going to bite like that. And he was perfectly ready for it. Foot still flawed because he was still short of the start-finish line. And he just absolutely perfect car control. And it's not only steering, it's also, sometimes it's throttle, and we saw that in turn one. And as you say, Oscar sort of, admittedly, Oscar was the one that got the biff, really. So in a way, it's, because Oscar's car was nudged, I suppose we have to be a little bit more careful saying, well, therefore it wasn't going to be quite as easy for him to do a sort of Max or a Terry Neuville. But and I'm sure Oscar's car control is pretty good. We just don't get to see it much. And it brings me back to my point as to why I was at Monza and not Abu Dhabi, because how often do we get to see the likes of Adrian Formeau, Sébastien Ogier, and Terry Neuville right there in front of you, doing handbrake turns, doing slalom moves, doing whatever you want to do. They were doing it all. How often do you get to see that right in front of you? You don't get to see it with Formula One drivers very much. So I just need that as a fix. I need to see these guys and how good they are. And yeah, we saw that with Max, definitely. But I saw it about 87 times with Terry Neuville at Monza in one day. Just amazing car control. And it's also fluid as well. I love watching that. I don't care what anybody says. For me, rallying is absolutely brilliant, because you can see the drivers doing what they do very well. And in Grand Prix racing, yes, you can see differences in style between Max and Charles and Lewis and Oscar and Lando and George. but we can't actually see that much. We don't get to see the pedal, the footwell area very well, periodically, but it's not very good. We see the steering, but it's not, you know, it's not the whole picture. In rallying, you get everything. You get the handbrake, you get the feet, you get the steering, and from the outside, you can see it all anyway. It's wonderful. And it's just, it's not that it's better than Formula One. It just gives me a better insight into understanding how good they are in Formula One. That's really what I feel about it. It's just a great compliment to what we're seeing. Compliment in the compliment, as is from compliment, if you see what I mean. Yeah, so there you go, Aaron Lee. Well noticed. Aaron Lee rejoined P20, Max. Haven't heard anyone talk about this, even though to me it was, after the crash occurred, the biggest thing that defined each of their race results. Is what Max did a kind of skill technique that he or other drivers practice or consciously prepare for? Absolutely not, no. And I'll tell you something else. They don't prepare for that. That's in the middle of the pack on the first lap. Absolutely not. That is all about confidence and feel and having the ability. There's a word that Dennis Jenkinson came up with. Dug out of the dictionary that I'd never heard of. Preconception or something like that. I can't really remember what it was, but it was something like that, which is a word that describes the ability to know in what direction you're facing, even when you're revolving, and knowing where north is, basically, and therefore being able to control a spin very well, and to know when to ease the steering, increase the steering, and brake and use the throttle in the middle of the spin. It's a real talent, and it's not something really you can practice it a little bit probably, but you're either born with it or you're not, like Max is born with his talent, and that's what he has, and what a lot of other drivers obviously don't have. And I think I would say here that when you see these guys doing donuts, the car is completely set up for donuts, and it's not that difficult for your average F3, F2 driver to jump into an F1 car, set up for donuts, and do donuts quite well, you know, with sort of 2 meters either side, concrete wall, 2,000 people there. They're going to be able to do a donut without too much sweat. But if you've got a Grand Prix car not set up for donuts, on full tanks, in the middle of turn 1, then it's a different story. Then it is about driver talent. And that is something that they don't practice at all, because they only practice it when they're set up for donuts. They don't even practice it then, really. They just know it's going to be doable. And because, you know, I would imagine at the end of the race, they probably had a setting on the car when they were doing the donuts that they went into at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, but certainly not the setting they had on the first corner. And so it is about talent there. It is about ability to feel where the car is when you're going backwards, basically. And some drivers would have that better. And it'll be an indication of how good they are overall as driver packages. And, you know, I will always remember the Nigel Mansell donuts. And to my mind, they were the first real donuts ever done in Formula One. That was 86, the winter of 86 in, what was it called? Waco. That's right. It was WAKO, Honda factory in Tokyo, as distinct from Toshigi, which is the Honda factory out on the outskirts of Tokyo, where there is a big test track. This was just the factory, the plant, and they'd never seen, the Honda staff had never seen or heard the full Williams Honda in all its glory, because there was no Japanese Grand Prix. And so we took those cars out to Japan, took a car out to Japan, an 11A, and we were in front of this sort of 60s, 70s building, quite typical Japanese austere building, white fronted, lots of white coated Japanese, thousands of them, you know, production staff everywhere. And we had the car there. And the idea was for Nigel to do an acceleration run between the, he was about to get in the car. He just said to John Cadd, you know, it's got a new diff. And John said, yeah, new diff, yeah. And new crown wheel and pinion, good, okay. So he gets in the car and just, I don't know, 11, 12,000 revs, just turns the steering wheel and does these donuts like this. And perfectly concentric donuts, puts his hand up in the middle, the usual Nigel thing. This car's not set up for donuts, obviously. And when the dust had settled and he stopped, the whole place was deserted. Everybody had run a mile. They couldn't believe what had happened, this bomb that had gone off in front of them. That was the first real donut. And Nigel was incredibly good. donuts and general auto test stuff. And that's why he always did very well on those rally sprints at Donington, when it was 4 rally drivers, 4 racing drivers, and there was a circuit race, there was a rally stage, and then there was all these parking tests where you had to go forward, reverse the car, go into a cone, do a spin, blah, 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 all that stuff. Nigel was always brilliant at that stuff as well. And that was long before he was winning in Formula 3. And I remember thinking then, yeah, he has this ability, this incredible ability, which shows up in all areas. And he's good on the rally stage as well. So Duan has just got Piastri. I think that means ahead of Norris, does it? It's a sort of is greater than. I'm going back to my algebra now. I think that's what it means. Piastri is going to beat Norris. Lando is very confident as he crossed the line that next year will be his year. It's always famous last words when you say something like that, isn't it? Oh, Lando. Kevin Pryor. Bruce McLaren would be proud of the team he founded. Yeah, of course he would. He's a winner. Wow, they've won the championship again. I couldn't believe the last win was 98, which was that year they got the Bridgestones, wasn't it? DC and Mika. I suppose that's logical. They never won it in the whole Jensen-Lewis era. Funny, isn't it? I suppose so. John Brown, asymmetrical champ. Championship. What does that mean? It's not going to be an evenly symmetrical championship. It's going to be lots of weird things going on asymmetrically. Yeah, probably. Gianpaolo Vanetti. Gianpaolo, I hope you don't mind my Italian pronunciation. I'm still coming off a high of organising of... actually, it was weird. I ordered a latte and got a latte, which was just hot milk. I'd completely forgotten that in Italy a latte is hot milk. That's the word for milk. Yeah, duh. It's cappuccino, macchiato, and lot of pistachio croissants now and buns I saw in all the Italian coffee shops. It's like a plague going across Europe, isn't it? All started by Martin Vigada, the co-driver of Terry Neuville, who lives in Andorra, who constantly refers to Two Shots Cafe Andorra, where the speciality are these pistachio buns, which I always mention on Instagram for what it's worth when I'm doing my Indian stuff. And yes, I do speak Hindi. And now they're in Italy. Lots of pistachio buns at Monza. Amazing. Anyway, how do we get onto that? Sorry, Gianpaolo, yeah. Hi, Peter. Do you think Ferrari will favour Lewis over Charles if they have a championship-winning car next year and Sir Lewis is slightly ahead for commercial reasons? No, I don't. No, I think a lot of commercial reasons for Charles Leclerc to win the championship as well from a Ferrari perspective. And I think they'll be very happy with either of them. I think, yes, Sir Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari is a big thing. I'm not sure it was the reason that they hired him, commercial reasons. I think there's a bit of Freddie Vasseur and history going back to ART, and I think there's also, he's just so good and he's well-rounded and he's at the right stage of his career to be right there with Charles. I think it's as much that. In other words, I don't think it was, well, we really want Carlos Sainz. He's definitely a great racing driver, but we're going to make a lot more money if we have Lewis Hamilton. I don't think there was that much thinking along those lines, from what I gather. So I don't think they would favour Lewis. No, I think they will. I think Charles has been around long enough and he knows the garage well enough to know how to get the best from his team of people around him and do the job. I think he'll benefit a bit from Lewis as well. I definitely think he will learn a bit from Lewis, which we shouldn't discount. I'm not sure Lewis will learn that much from Charles, really, because they drive in quite a similar way, which will be nice for Lewis to see. And all Lewis will be thinking about is, have I got a front end and have I got a decent tyre temperature window here that I can drive within? And then he'll just get on with it. John Brown, keep shilling, Peter. I think I know what you mean by that, John. I think it means keep going, does it, right? I hope so. Shaq Marriott. Also, you'd be surprised of how close the great Kimi is going to get to George when he gets comfortable, shorter corner driver for sure, and softer inputs. But Clark always said he only feared Gurney. Well, that's true. Jim Clark the driver he did respected the most was Dan Gurney, but he never really raced in the same era as Stirling Moss, though, don't forget. He did beat Stirling in the, I'm going to say it was the August Bank Holiday Formula One race at Brands Hatch, 1961. Or 60 or 61, I can't remember. And he beat Stirling. And he beat Stirling in a race in South Africa in the beginning of 61. But Stirling hadn't qualified that well. And at that point, they were pretty much on a par in terms of pace, I think. But but then Stirling was still better in 61 compared with Jim Clark. He definitely had more. He just had more experience, more finesse, more road dust, and he was winning Monaco's, winning the Nürburgring, and Jimmy was doing lots of good things, but he wasn't in Stirling's class. So, and then Stirling had his accident beginning of 62. So, I don't think Jimmy's opinion of Stirling, which was always incredibly high, massive respect for Stirling, I don't think that's relevant to his respect and feelings about Dan. But thank you for mentioning that's true. I mean, Dan and Jimmy were very close. And of course, it was Dan that introduced Jim to the whole concept of going to Indy with the Lotus. And Dan should take all the credit for that rear engine revolution at Indy, which began after the 62 US Grand Prix. And they took a Lotus 25 to the Speedway and just ran the Formula One car there just to see how it would get on. And they were pleasantly surprised at how quick it was. It was flat everywhere, I think. But it was, they realized then, Lotus and Jimmy, that this was the future as far as Indy goes. Going back to Kimi, you'd be surprised how close the great Kimi is going to get to George. Well, I hope you're right, in a way. I'd love to see that, just be proof that a driver who does turn in early. My only worry, as I said before, is that Mercedes somehow will get that out, get him away from that, because they'll keep cross-referring him to George in the same way that Oscar's driving has gone off a little bit in terms of one-lap perfection, because they keep referring him to Lando. He's a different sort of driver. I'm not sure the teams understand that. And it sounds quite arrogant to say that, but I don't think they do. I really don't think they do. Zishan Asar. I've had you before, Zishan, but always welcome. Peter, do you think Fernando Alonso has a realistic chance of winning the driver's title in 26? He'll be 45, 46 by then, driving an Adrian Newey Aston Martin. Is this his only chance before retirement? Well, if he keeps the drive, and he's convincing Adrian and the Strolls that he should be in that car in 26, I think he will have a very good chance of winning the World Championship, yes. And I don't think his driving will be necessarily any worse than it would have been 10 years prior. I don't think Fernando would race unless he felt he could do it as well as he wanted to do it. And if he's in an Adrian Newey car and it's as good as all the other Adrian Newey cars, he could easily win races and win a championship in that car. Not easily. He could logically do it. And yeah, I think, we all have to be ready for that. I think he could. It'll be interesting to see how he goes in 25. 24 has been a little bit disappointing, I think, from Fernando's point of view, apart from putting aside the performance of the car, which kind of got slower and slower as the season progressed. I think also his performance relative to Lance Stroll wasn't great. I think that's one of the measuring sticks. He didn't completely dominate Stroll. Well, I suppose he did. I guess, I don't know. I just expected a bit more from him sometimes. He sometimes qualified quite well and then just sunk like a stone in the race, didn't he? And it was all kind of... John Brown says Alonso is washed. Does that mean washed up or he's very clean? Sure, though. Jay Webb. Hi, Peter. Any memories of the 1998 World Rally Championship season where Carlos Sainz came agonizingly close to another title? Well, not really, apart from the agony of how close he got and how Carlos handled that. And I think that just shows a lot of how Carlos Sr. handled that. We see today in the way Carlos Jr. is handling his horrendous situation of having to go from a winning Ferrari to Williams. And it was with dignity, and it's with, we love motorsport and we'll just get on with it. I'm still almost annoyed. I suppose it's the wrong word, but I'm going to say it. I'm annoyed that Carlos Jr. is not going to Audi, because at least then he would have had a brand and a team that he could get to know and be a part of for the next 10 years, for example, be a brand ambassador. It's a great name, obviously, amongst motor manufacturers and motorsport. And yeah, it wouldn't have been a great year in 2025, but who knows in 26? All bets are off for that. And guess what? Sauber actually didn't look that bad in the last race of 2024, did they? And then you've got Jonathan Wheatley joining. I think Carlos in a Sauber next year would have been pretty good. Carlos and Nico Hülkenberg, pretty good team. And I think they would have got some decent results. And I just hope Carlos, after race 6, isn't thinking, I wish I'd gone to Sauber. This Williams is terrible. And I hope Williams deliver the car that he deserves. I much doubt it, but sadly, but I hope they do. I'm going to just unfreeze the thing here, if I may. The chat here hasn't really worked. I'm going to have to go to this one. Stone 670 AD, golden handshake to finish behind Stroll. What's this, Fernando? For next year, you mean? Maybe. I can't imagine Fernando's that motivated by money these days, is he? I'm sure he's motivated by it, but not to the point where he's going to let Stroll beat him. Dwayne. This is a very odd thing coming up from Dwayne. Peter, despite being British, Lando is no good. Get over it. Well, that's your opinion. I don't like the use of capital letters there, or the emphatic statement, Lando is no good. I mean, that is a completely ludicrous statement to say of somebody who's just dominated the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, let alone several other Grand Prix this year. And if he's no good, tell me about his ability to float into high speed and medium speed corners the way he does, vastly quicker than Oscar Piastri, and to be as fluid as he is around circuits like Miami. Tell me that. He is good. I know, end of story. Kevin Pryor says, I don't see Max winning next season. Newey gone will hurt him. Yeah, it definitely hurt him, for sure. But already Red Bull, I mean, in a way, it's quite a good thing that Newey left when he did, because it gave Red Bull to get a time to get over the shock and then to start to think about how they were going to regroup, which they've done in the second half of the year. And they've actually done that quite well, actually, I think, haven't they? How many people around August would have said, yeah, for sure Red Bull are going to win Grand Prix before the end of the year. Max is going to win again without Adrian. Not many. I think I did, but not many. And there he was, winning again. Okay. Not in a car that was as good as the McLaren in the last race. And that's obviously their benchmark for where they'll be working over the winter. So I've just had a thing here. The whole chat's just gone. There you go. Said it couldn't do it. So what I'm going to do here is try to get a new link for the chat. So just bear with me a little bit. I'm going to try and be very, very clever here. But it's always... Now, when I try to open my YouTube page, it says can't do it. So I'm reloading. This could have been... This could be a slight internet glitch, and I might have lost internet. Unlikely, because the internet's been, touch wood, very good here, but let's have a look. I'm going back now into OBS, and I'm going to go to the browser, put in a new link into the browser, and then I'm going to go back to the pop-up chat, and I'm going to select the first one that's selectable. Which is that one. Yeah, it's come up. How about that? I've rejigged the whole thing in a couple of minutes. Salamander. Hi, Peter. Great chat. Thanks. Who do you think would come out well, apart from Max, if the drivers had to take turns to drive all the other cars on the grid instead of having one car all year? Well, that's my philosophy. That's my thing I wrote for F1 Racing back in 2000, where looking ahead to the future of Grand Prix racing, I said... For a start, Alex Wirtz, I think, was FIA president. And then every Thursday night, we had this auction before every Grand Prix, a bit like the PPL cricket, in which the teams had to bid for which drivers they were going to have in their cars that weekend. and no driver could do 2 races in succession, and no driver with the same team, and no driver could do more than, I don't know whether it was, I couldn't work it out now in my head, but let's say it's no more than 5 races with the same team in one season. And so there was enormous public interest in this auction on Thursday night, and it was always to do with how much money they were going to be paid and who could bid for him, and some teams wanted to keep the best driver for last and last race and so forth. It was a mega idea, I thought, which everybody rejected immediately. Anyway, that's basically what you're saying. If we did have that idea, how would it work? Well, you know, they're all good. They're all very good. I mean, that's why you see all these young F2 hotshots getting into Formula 1 cars and going quite well on occasion before they're putting it into the wall. And it's because they're all pretty good. And to drive a Grand Prix car well amongst the top 100 drivers in the world is not that difficult in terms of all the technology and the amount of sim work you can do. You can get in a car now, and a pretty good F2 driver is going to be within a second and a half of the pace pretty quickly, and he's probably going to, and if he has 2 or 3 days in the car, he's going to be within half a second of the pace. But it's nonetheless, there are some drivers that are just outstandingly good in many ways, and there are other drivers who are just very good in a number of ways, but not outstanding. Max is an outstanding driver. Charles is outstanding. Lewis, for me, is outstanding. And I think Lando has his areas. I think George does, you know, slightly lower tier, but still there. How would they all go? I still think, you know, it would be the top 3 who would do well. I think Max would still be very good. I think Charles would be. Lewis would be. And so it goes on. It'd be interesting. I think Piastri might be ahead of Lando, maybe. More sort of native, just get in the car and throw it around. George would be very good as well. Difficult, isn't it? Good question, though. We can talk about that for hours in the Two Shot Cafe in Andorra. Medium rare. That's a good name. Charles would thank. By the way, did you see that new thing by the US Health Department yesterday saying that everyone has to stop eating steak and eat beans and peas and lentils? Good luck with that in Nebraska. Or Texas even. Charles should thank K-Mag Checo for crashing in Monaco and Pirelli for a C4 tyre that lasts 70 laps for his Monaco win. Yeah, well, I think any tyre is going to last a long time in Monaco. So, yeah, anyway, Pirelli did a good job. And, yep, K-Mag Checo, I agree. Yeah, but, you know, he's had a lot of bad luck. He's had a lot of bad runs at Monaco. So he was going to have a good one. Don't forget, Jim Clark never won Monaco. He never even won the Formula Junior race. Mike Taylor, I think, won that. Henry Taylor. And then and Nigel never won Monaco either. Both brilliant racing drivers. Never won Monaco. Led the race many times, both of them, but never won it. Zane Merker says, keep an eye on Freddie Slater. Yeah, will do. Kaido Tigisun. Several guys go from F2 to F1 this year. Bortoletto, Aaron test driver, Doohan, Antonelli. Any thoughts on the post-season test results on them? Prognosis? No, I didn't really watch that testing very closely, to be honest. Didn't really understand it. To me, yeah, I don't know why. Testing there doesn't seem to mean very much these days, does it, in terms of actually evaluating anything. And I see Daniel Yoncadella is joining Aston Martin, I think, doing sim work. Quite pleased about that, because I used to do a lot of interviews with him when he was in FIA F3. Very quick driver. Often wonder what happened to him. And now he is Aston Martin, sim driver. It just shows that old Tom McCullough knows exactly what he's doing. Anyway, back to square one. Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, Jack Doohan did a good job, I thought. Well, kind of, you know. Is he the next Ignazio Giunti? I don't know. You know, who finished 4th in his first Grand Prix, but you know, give Jack the benefit of the doubt there. A big ask for him to jump in that car and do that race. So I think he'll be very good once he finds his feet. I've got a lot of faith in his talent and his ability and his mental approach, uncluttered mental approach. Antonelli, yeah, as we say, you know, providing he can be who he is and just continue to be going into corners early, working on his finesse. They're not throwing soft tyres at him at the wrong moment of untimed practice and things like that, as they did at Monza. He'll be okay. He'll be good, I think. Bortoletto, Aaron, don't know. Can't comment really. Aaron, I don't know, something about Aaron looks a bit frantic to me. Maybe wrong. Bortoletto looks a little bit more composed, a little bit more Carlos Pace-like. Thought I was going to say Senna, didn't you? Let's say Felipe Massa. Hi, Peter. Lance, Alex. Hi, Peter. Do you think both sides of the Mercedes garage will have been sharing data all the way through last season, or maybe just one way to George? No, I'm sure they shared data in terms of overlays of what one another are doing. It probably confused Lewis quite a lot and probably helped George a little bit. But I don't think teams today would be able to have bits of engineering set up data on a car that wouldn't be instantly obvious to the other side of the garage. The only thing you're talking about is how much a driver will allow himself to be influenced by what the other driver's doing with his data. And as I say, that to me is usually causes more trouble than it does solve any issues, because you start to think outside your own sphere of operation and the way you want to run the car, and you think, oh well, if he's getting the power on here, my engineer's telling me I've got to get the power on here, how am I going to do that? Okay, I'll give it a go, and then I have to brake a little bit earlier, and then you get confused. You got to drive the way you drive, and I'm a great believer in that. You look at all the great drivers of the past who did all that without any telemetry whatsoever. Then it does help new drivers to get into Formula One and do a half reasonable job. But at the level that we're talking about, in other words, Lewis versus George, I don't believe that any overlays from George would have been beneficial to Lewis, or vice versa for that matter. They would have been more interesting to George because he would have seen a few things that Lewis was doing that he could try within his envelope. But from Lewis's point of view, he kind of knows how to do it. And when he sees George doing something completely different, it would just confuse him, I think. Peter's obsessed with Lando. This is this Dwayne guy. Dwayne, it's the last time I'm going to put one up from you. This is a ridiculous comment. You're obviously anti-Lando, which is an absurd position to take. So would you please desist from that? Thank you very much. Slipstream Merchant. Hi, Peter. Out of Lawson and Tsunoda, who do you think has the best driving style for the way Red Bull car handling characteristics to do a good job? Max. Well, I think, as I've said before, it's always good to have two different styles of driver in a team, like Leclerc and Sainz. Very good combination. Now with Leclerc and Lewis, you've got two similar styles, but Sainz was the other end of the spectrum, and that's why we saw Sainz winning races when Leclerc wasn't very good, and vice versa. Of the two, I would say Lawson would be the better balance for Max, because Lawson is definitely car control-y, rear of the car, feeling the rear, very, very good on that, good with the steering, good with the throttle, and a very late braker for sure. And that's quite a good counterpoint to Max. So, you've got the engineers have got all the full gamut of information they need from both styles of driving. I think Yuki's a little bit more spiky than Liam, which is why I wouldn't say he was going to be quite as useful to Max, because you don't want spikiness if you can get away from it with the inputs. You want it to be a little bit softer, and that's what Liam has. So that's more comparable to what Max is doing, just doing it in a different way. So Kevin Pryor says, Norris is the modern Damon Hill, I think. Yeah, it's a little bit of that, I think. I mean, Damon was much more, let's get on with it. I'll just drive the car, and he's very confident with his ability to hold the rear and balance a slide, and a little bit Liam Lawson-like in the way he drove. And his personality was very, this is it, unfazed, get on with it. Whereas I think Lando, as I say, because of the way he's come into Formula One and the sort of way Zach's had his arm around him, and he is his own man, Lando, but he definitely is influenced by everything that's going on around him at McLaren. And it's quite an all-consuming thing, isn't it? If you think about it, from the whole point of view of the whole technology center there, the building, the people, the staff, the way everything is, it's kind of, it's all so much. It's almost too much. It's not just a race team in the way that Red Bull is a race team grown up from the old Paul Stewart Grand Prix days. Obviously it's bigger now, but it's still basically the same thing. It's just a race team. Whereas McLaren is a huge thing. And it's kind of difficult if you're in the middle of all that, you're in the eye of the storm. It's kind of difficult to think beyond your own little world there, isn't it? Friction Circler. Oh, there you go. There's a good name. Peter, in looking back at past teammates, Alonso called Trulli out as the fastest, hardest to beat on his day, and we all remember his good tier qualifying pace. Can you describe his driving style? Yeah, Jarno was it was the opposite extreme to Fernando in terms of his seamless transition from traveling in a straight line to initiating the load in the car and into a corner. It was absolutely seamless, as good as anybody I've ever seen in Formula One history, period. Whereas Fernando has always had that slight sort of, right, I'm on charge here. It's always that, and then he's beautiful with footwork and handwork, and the car always looks beautifully balanced and poised, usually, and whatever sort of corner it is. But it's always that, little jink like that. And Jarno never had that. And I think that was what Fernando never really got to the bottom of. And because he couldn't imagine how somebody who was so seamless could then still be very quick. Jarno had an incredible feel for traveling in a straight line. And he used to spend more time than I've ever seen any driver spend on working out where to position the car on the straight, where to be near the wall, away from the wall, and to where was the least turbulence, all the rest of it. He's very, very good in terms of the Rob Wilson thing of coming out of a left-hander. If the next corner's a right-hander and there's a short straight, let's say out of Ascari into the Parabolica, very good at coming out, just staying in a straight line for as long as possible and then moving over to the left at the last possible comfortable moment, just so he's doing all his acceleration in a straight line. Everything about Lando was straight lines. Keep everything as straight as possible. Very early turn in as well. Very good. His shortcoming was inability to deal with understeer and graining. He hated it, hated groove tires. If he had understeer, he would just, get slower and slower, basically. He didn't have an ability to... The only way he could deal with understeer was to left foot brake and to use the rear to balance the understeer. But in doing that, he was always slowing the car down. He wasn't manipulating the front in the way that Fernando can. And so that was his shortcoming. But when he had a good front end, he was unbelievably quick. Very, very good. Very good. And I remember, regular viewers will know that one of the best bits of racetrack in the world is turns 9, 10 in Bahrain, coming out of that slow corner, and then you go through the kink, which is a blind kink to the left, very fast, accelerating still, 6th, 7th gear, and then you're braking downhill into the tight turn 10, which is a very important corner because you've got a long straight afterwards, but it's only, 2nd or 3rd gear. So you've got to get the car stopped, and what you do not want is any sort of glitch going into 10 because it'll destabilize your run down the long straight. And I remember having a long chat with Jarno about that section of road and analysing it with him, and that whole business of getting the car a little bit more to the right as you're going through the kink so that you're just opening up the area where you want to brake for 10, just giving yourself a little bit more moment to get the car stopped in an absolutely square, flat way before you start to turn into 10, and therefore getting a very clean run out of it. And he loved that. And he used it in the race. I remember he was in the Toyota at the time, and I think he passed 3 cars in that race, finished 4th, I think. And he passed 3 cars just purely on others bobbling, and he just like that doing I remember chatting to him afterwards, and he was just like, wow, it was just brilliant, loved it. And he was just a great guy, Jarno, lovely guy, still is, his wine and his just general feel for life. Great guy. So, right. Zane Murcher says, did you see him race at Warwick Farm? I think we're talking about Jim Clark here. I did. I saw Jim Clark race several times at Warwick Farm, 65, 66, 67 and 68. And he won in 65 and 68. 67, he was second to Jackie Stewart in the Australian Grand Prix, it was that year. Jackie had the new Dunlops on the BRM, definitely quicker than Jimmy's Firestones. And in 66 he won as well. Yeah, he's in the Lotus 39. I think it was the only race he won in the Tasman that year, in the Lotus 39, which was a lovely car. Lotus 32 with the Climax, development of it, yeah. Just beautiful. So, yeah, I used to be a flag marshal at Warwick Farm. So I wasn't in 65, but 66, 67 and 68 I was a marshal. And yeah, as I say, in the last live stream, I think I mentioned it. You know, there was a bit of debris on the track at one point, and the next car round, I just picked it up and was getting back behind the wooden sleepers, the marshal's post, and Jimmy was the next one. I went like that, and Jimmy sort of did that. Brilliant. Yeah, Jim Clark, Tasman Series, no shirt, shorts, suntanned, spending every minute when he wasn't at Warwick Farm at Bankstown Airport, getting his private pilot's license, and doing a very good job with that. Became a very, very good pilot. Thanks to Jeffrey Sykes at the AARC, who had his own aircraft and encouraged Jimmy to do that and set it all up for Jimmy. Jim Hazelton was his teacher, his pilot teacher. And Jim had everything organised. So Jim Clark would arrive from Warwick Farm after practice, go straight to Bankstown, and the plane, the AARC, Australian Automobile Racing Club, which ran Warwick Farm, which I worked for when I left school and indeed school holidays, owned two Cessnas 150s with the AARC badge on the tail, because Jeff loved flying, and they were useful things to have anyway in those days. And Jim Clark learnt to fly in those. Wonderful. So there's a lot of Lando comments here. Poor Lando. I'm giving him a break. I mean, the guy's unbelievably good. Trail break 3R. Anyway, Lando needs to terminate the Mad Max broship. If he wants a friend, take a lesson from SLH and get a dog. Rivals are necessary in the supposed pinnacle of motorsport. I think Lando's pretty solid when it comes to that rivalry. I don't think he's got anything to learn on that side. As I say, his big problem is Piastri. And as I keep saying, if Daniel Ricciardo had been his teammate all this time, none of you people who are knocking Lando would be knocking Lando. It's all because of Piastri. And I predicted all this. The millisecond that they announced Piastri was joining McLaren, I said this would be a major problem for Lando Norris. And I was right. I'm sorry. I hate beating the chest, but I was right. And it's purely because if you got Lando, you don't need Oscar Piastri. If you got Oscar Piastri, you don't need Lando. You put somebody who's a little bit more compliant and slower in the car. Does Oscar prefer a strong front end? No, not as much as Lando, I wouldn't have thought. I think Oscar's... let me think about that. I think when Oscar's being the true Oscar, he probably does when he's thinking about short corners and what Max does with the car. But Oscar's quite... as we've seen in the second half of the year, he's not afraid to drive on the back end of the car, and... he's certainly not afraid to flick oversteer, for example, or indeed any sort of oversteer. And so I think he probably feels he doesn't need a perfect front end and he can probably drive around it. Whether or not that's quicker than living with the front end and trying to make the front end better, I doubt. But I think he's going down that sort of path, and he's seen how quick Lando can be driving mainly a neutral car or back-endy car, and therefore he's going away from the front end. And I think if it just came down to who can hold a slide best with the power on, it's probably Oscar Piastri just compared with Lando. But it's only because Lando wouldn't want to be losing time with too much oversteer, whereas Oscar probably loves the oversteer, I would imagine, looking at the way he drives. So Zane Murcher, Clark always said he was a sheep farmer who went racing. Yeah, well, he did. And I think he did that just to keep grounded, especially when he went to Indy and he didn't want to, get too sucked in by all the ballyhoo. He liked to be the sheep farmer from Duns, and he quite enjoyed saying, because not often in Formula One where you ask, where is your birthplace or where are you from, give your town of designation. He probably would have said, I don't know, I guess he might have said Duns, but with Jimmy, I mean, he loved saying Churnside because it was an even smaller village, and he loved the whole concept of being a sheep farmer in this small town, and it was just his way of keeping both feet on the ground, I think. So, Bain, how would you rank the teams in 26 from best to worst? In 26? I have no idea. Absolutely no idea. Cadillac number 1. Audi second. I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. It's all down to power units and how they're going to do that, isn't it? Ford. There's too many car companies in Formula One now, aren't there? Why do we want so many? They're always going on about, got to have more manufacturers. Why? Why are they going on and on and on about all that? We only had 2 in rallying, and it was one of the best rally seasons I've ever seen. Hyundai versus Toyota. Okay, Ford were in there too, thanks to Malcolm Wilson, but it was basically Hyundai versus Toyota. That's all you need, just a great competition. You just need that. You don't need 10, 12. How many manufacturers in WEC now? Far too complicated. Well, for brains like mine, anyway. Diego Marina says, hi there, Diego. Nice to hear from you. Imagine what Bruce McLaren would say if he could step into Zach Brown's modern-day garage, or indeed Ron Dennis's home. Bruce would say, well, where do I sit down? Where do I sit down and do, just work out what I'm doing with the gear ratios? There'd be nowhere to sit down with all of these computer screens everywhere. What's on TV? What's going on here? Yeah, where are the gear ratios? Yeah, are we running the Can-Am drive shafts on the car? Yeah, really, mate, yeah. Yeah, it'd be fun, wouldn't it? So let's get going. Paul Anthony Nelson says, great stream, Peter. Enjoyable chats as always. Thanks very much. Thank you. Very kind of you to say that, Paul. Dutch UK racing question. How can they have the cars in qualifying touching the floor, see sparks, and then with Parc Ferme they put 100 kilos of fuel on board and not touching the floor in race trim? Great work. Thanks, Peter. Quite a good question, actually. I suppose... Well, don't they wear away those? I think those skid plate things wear away quite quickly, don't they? I think that's what's going on. I think they're designed to do that. And I think they're designed to create those sparks because they look good as well. I'm not sure there's any reason for them apart from a cosmetic thing. I may be wrong there. I suppose I ought to ask somebody with a brain. I do know a lot of people with brains, actually, believe it or not. Got some... That's no reflection on anybody here, you viewers who all have brains, definitely. I'm talking about somebody who's ignorant as I am. I do actually know some people with brains in Formula One, what I'm trying to say. Anyway, M.A. Khan, super chat, thank you. Hi, Peter. Can you tell us about the mindset of Mansell in the Barron years? How did he stay motivated when we saw others like Lewis wanting to give up when the back of the field are in a slower car? Yeah, well, to give him his due, I mean, slightly different today. Well, I suppose it's not, if you're at the back of the grid. Okay. I can't really obviously speak about Lewis's mindset when he's running P17 and they've said to him, sorry, Lewis, this is, we should have done a better job today, not much going on we can do, and what Lewis's mindset is at that point. But what I can tell you is the mindset of Nigel, which I grew up with, if you like. It was my formative Formula One period, and it was always, I am the fastest racing driver in the world, and if I'm in the best car or the right car, I can win Grand Prix and World Championship, no problem whatsoever. And he always had that mindset when he was in Formula 3, let alone Formula 1 at the back of the grid in a difficult Lotus in 1983, for example. He always had that mentality. And so he was always looking for opportunities to show that talent and to remind everybody that he was there. And he built up a resilience to what people thought about him or said about him, because he'd had so much negative publicity and comment in his early days that it was just like water off a duck's back to him. It was just like, oh yeah, okay, another guy rubbishing me, who cares? I'm just going to drive this thing as hard as I possibly can. And so it was all that upbringing stuff. It was those early years that gave him that ability always to drive at 100%, regardless of where he was, because he was doing it for himself and he knew how good he was. And yeah, a good example of that was Austria 80 in his first Formula One race, when he had that fuel leak. And there was a lot of negative publicity about Nigel being in the Lotus. And so therefore his only mindset when he got into that car, very, very difficult, impossible car to drive, really. I mean, it was a ridiculously long version of the car with terrible handling and grip and balance that Mario had tested briefly after the German Grand Prix and said, yeah, give this to Mansell, as he would. And it was a horrendous thing. And yet he found a little groove that he could repeat around the Austrian circuit, very quick circuit in those days. And then he got this fuel leak. And it never occurred to him to come into the pits and complain about it. It was just like, here's a thing I'm going to overcome. And it was just like a challenge to him. So that's how it is. That's how it was with Nigel, always. And he had so many of these different challenges that hit him early in his career, bad cars, difficult situations, political situations in teams, that he just learned how to do it. It just became par for the course for him completely. And I think, as I said before, after Abu Dhabi 21, I did say that Lewis has had so many good years in Formula One and obviously so many world championships that it'll be very difficult for him to be a street fighter in the midfield, because he's been there, done that. And why does he need to do it anyway? Almost that. So that's why there's a difference. Nigel never knew anything better than being a street fighter from day one. That's all he ever was for the first 60% of his Formula One career. Whereas Lewis was a dominant driver virtually from day one. And so that's why there's a difference between the two in terms of what they did in a bad car and do in a bad car. And when Nigel did get a good car, it was just like, this is so easy. All I've got to do now is just blow Nelson Piquet away. Double world champion, no problem at all. Easy. Which he did. Or Keke, and he was there because the car was suddenly as good as he was. So, yeah, it's an interesting, good question. Thank you very much for that. Quite sure how I get out of it now. I've got this. Okay, there we go. Oh, that was quite clever. Kevin Price says, thank you for your answer to my question. Well, pleasure. Thank you very much. So, Donald McLaughlin. Hello, Don. Hello, Peter. Looking back in time, was the FIA responsible partly for Ayrton Senna's death in not letting Williams keep advanced electronics that day control the balance of the car? Wow, that's a very long answer to that question. And of course, it wasn't the FIA, it was Bernie. It was Bernie who, in August 1993, at Hockenheim, coerced or encouraged, he would probably say, all the team owners to sign what became known as the Hockenheim Agreement, which was basically banning everything. Anything electronic on the car was going to be banned for 94. This was Williams having won 2 world championships in a row with active ride and traction control and an ABS. And so that was what it was. It was Bernie. It's nothing to do with the FIA. The FIA then just enforced what Bernie and the team owners said they wanted them to do. So don't blame the FIA for that. And then on top of that, with the cars being absolutely rigidly stiff and running as low as they possibly could with a plank under the chassis in order to maximize what downforce they could, they became undrivable over bumps. The only suspension on the car was in effect the tyres, the pressure you ran in the tyres, and therefore tyre pressure and tyre temperatures were absolutely critical. And at Imola, Bernie had got really from the start of the year, but Imola was the first time he had a chance to prove it, to do it, was to have a safety car in Formula One in a reply to the IndyCar safety car that had been looking pretty good on British television with Nigel Mansell over there in '93. And Bernie thought one quick fix of trying to keep the ratings up in Formula One against IndyCar was to have a safety car, pace car in Formula One as well, because he quite liked the idea of telling Charlie to dispatch the pace car because the race was quite boring and bunch the field up again. He quite liked that whole idea. So here was an opportunity to run the new safety car, pace car for the first time. It was Imola '94. And there was a start line shunt involving JJ Leto and Pedro Lamy, I think it was. And they collided on the grid and there was debris everywhere. And there's actually some injuries in the grandstand from flying debris. And normally up until that point, if there was a start line shunt, the race would be red flagged and stopped. And then there would be a completely new start and spare cars would have been allowed. That was the rule. But because Bernie wanted this safety car thing going on, he then dispatched this safety car, which wasn't a safety car as we know it today. It was basically a road-going Opel with normal road brake pads, tyres, just absolutely bog-standard car with a few stickers on it, driven by very talented Italian driver Max Angelelli, who didn't even have his overalls zipped up because there was no chance they were going to dispatch a safety car. Why were they? The logical thing was that they were going to stop the race. Restart the race. And Charlie thought the same thing. He was standing there doing nothing, just thinking, oh, well, we're going to restart the race. I better get going. And suddenly the message came in, get out in the safety car. And they couldn't believe it. So they went out and they had to lead this field round in this absurd road-going Opel with the tyre temperatures dropping like stones out of the tyres for 4 or 5 laps of Imola. Ayrton at the front of the race going ballistic because he knew what was happening with his tyre pressures and temperatures. And equally knowing that he had right behind him in his mirrors Michael Schumacher in a Benetton, which Ayrton felt was illegal and was still running traction control. Ayrton had driven absolutely brilliantly to take the pole in what was then still a difficult Williams. And the last thing he wanted was, at the restart, because the tyre temperatures were cool and down and the car was likely to bottom out, the last thing he wanted was to have to back off over the bumps of Tamburello and give Michael an opportunity to slipstream past and take the lead, because he thought then, coming out of Tosa, the Benetton with its traction control, as Ayrton saw it, would then have just disappeared. So Ayrton was absolutely fixated on making sure that he was still leading out of Tamburello with a decent lead. And yeah, he came out of that last corner at the restart, flat through Tamburello, hit the bump because the tyre pressures were ridiculously low. Effectively, the steering went light and the front of the car went up slightly missed the bumps. And by the time it landed, he was on the marbles on the outside of Tamburello in top gear, flat out, straight onto the grass, and that was it. And so it was all this combination of things. And you're right, if there'd been active ride on those cars, that accident probably would not have happened. Well, it wouldn't have happened for sure. And the tyre temperatures wouldn't have dropped. They wouldn't have been running the suspension or the tyre pressures they were running anyway, and everything would have been different. Equally, if there'd been a chicane there, obviously, and that was something that Ayrton had talked about with other drivers, Gerhard Berger and others, and the answer had been no. There's no room, no money, forget it. So it was all that. But I don't think you can blame the FIA for that, as I say. I think it's more what happened with all that banning of stuff overnight, Hockenheim 93. One thing they didn't ban was active differentials, which we still have on the cars today, because Bernie didn't even know they existed, as far as I can work out. And it's quite curious, because had active diffs been banned in Hockenheim 93, we wouldn't have them on the cars now, for sure, any more than we have active ride on the car. Wilf's Wanderings. I'll tell you what, I've been going now since midday CET. It's now 2. I'm going to have to wind up soon, because it's a Christmas fair at Jack's school this afternoon, and he's got a big golf tournament this weekend, so we need to get cracking. Wilf's Wanderings. To follow up on the Jim Clark question, how would Colin Chapman fit in? Oh, well, Colin would love it all. He would hate the size of the rule book, Colin, the current rule book. Rules were anathema to Colin, I think. He'd hate the rule book, but he would love all the technology that's there to be used, and to be used imaginatively as Colin would. And for sure, he would find something even today that would be a little bit different and would probably give him an unfair advantage of some sort. And I think it's so funny. If I look back now, and one of the great things about that Lotus 88 he did when they were, you know, with the ride height thing, and he built basically a 2 chassis car. One was suspended and one wasn't. And the suspended car was the one you raced with and the other one was the one you measured. It was brilliant. Twin chassis Lotus 88, which was basically legal in every respect, except that nobody wanted it. So it was eventually banned, which was why Colin basically lost interest in Formula One. But what he loved, what was so cool, I remember him saying, you know, but he said, Peter, the thing is, of course, just as the plural of Lotus is Lotus, and the plural of chassis is chassis. I thought, wow, that is very, very bright. If you've got a twin chassis car, you can still call it in the singular or the plural. Colin was fabulous. That's why he went out of his way to say the plural of Lotus is Lotus and not Lotuses or Loti or Lotum. Anyway, Peter Carroll Krause says, pistachio biscotti. There you go. It's all happening. All thanks to Martin Vigarda and Terry Nerville. Why do they not have young racers race on Monday? Steve Westberg. Well, yeah, why don't they do more testing in general after races? You'd imagine that would be a logical way to do it in the most cost-effective way. That's what I said when I had a chance once to talk to some of the team managers en masse. I suggested that. And they said, Peter, you don't know what you're talking about. It costs just as much to run the cars on a Monday as it does on a Friday. And I said, yeah, but you're in there. He said, no, the average cost of running, if a team wants to run an extra day, it was something like 10 million or something ridiculous. And I thought, oh, well, more fool you for getting down that path anyway. So there he is. So Eddie Moretti says, I'm a respectful guy for taking the effort to pronounce foreign words properly. Well, don't tell the girl from Monaco that chastises me regularly for calling him Charles Leclerc when she says it should be Charles Leclerc. And I keep saying, well, don't confuse him with Michel Leclerc. And I think that's why Charles likes to be known as Leclerc, because he doesn't want to be associated with Michel Leclerc, who didn't do a very good job in the Frank Williams Wolf Formula One car in 1976, as Charles no doubt is aware. This is going to be the last question. Eddie Moretti again, because you're a good man, Eddie, definitely. Do you think Lewis and Charles will push each other to new heights? I think Charles will benefit from Lewis being there. I think he'll see some things in Lewis's driving and Lewis's approach and Lewis's coolness that he will think, yeah, I don't need to get so wound up about these things. I'll let Lewis do it. It's probably that. I'm not sure Lewis will necessarily contribute to Charles at all. I mean, obviously he will if he goes quicker than Charles. It'll immediately get Charles' attention. But putting that to one side, I'm not sure there'll be anything about Lewis's approach and driving that Charles will think, wow, I need to do that. Because he's doing most of the things that Lewis does anyway in the car. And it'll be more Lewis's way of running the car and working with the mechanics and the team. And Charles' pretty good in that, but dealing with all the politics of the team, I'm sure that's where Charles will feed off Lewis's very, very rich approach to life and his understanding of when to push and when to shove within reason. So yeah, I think he's got a good man alongside him from which he can benefit there, Charles. Okay, so there we are. The end of yet another live stream. Thank you so much for everybody, for your questions. Hopefully this is relatively seamless in terms of PW. Oh, we had that thing in the middle, didn't we? Oh well, still haven't got there with a perfect one. Anyway, but anyway, it's been a lot of fun. I've got to get out. I've got to walk Dexter as well. So big thanks to everybody for joining us. As ever, big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and of course to Track Ninja for your support of this channel. Please support them if you can too as a viewer, but thanks a lot for watching. We'll be back again soon with more live streams, more fun, and yeah, stay safe.